What's going on, everybody? It's Johnny Candido of Candido Training HQ, and today I want to talk about preventing hyperextension of the spine. First, I want to mention some general principles, and that is to flex your glutes and then also to flex your abs, or bring your rib cage down, as some people say. And you may have already heard of this because Kelly Starrett, a mobility expert, has talked about this quite extensively already, and this can really just be applied to anything. These principles can be applied to lifting or just simply standing with proper posture. But what I want to do is to expand on this topic and talk about how it specifically applies to powerlifting. And I'll go through all three of the movements and some mental cues or some tips that you can use to prevent hyperextension if this is your issue. Okay, so the first movement I want to talk about is the deadlift. And this is somewhat of a rare scenario for someone to deadlift with the hyperextended spine because it requires a decent amount of mobility to even be able to do this. Nonetheless, I still have seen people who overarch their back to the point where it is less than ideal. The first tip is to consider starting with the bar slightly more in front of you. And the reason why I say this is because I generally recommend that you deadlift with the bar over the middle of your foot. But I see some people where they deadlift with the bar as close as possible to them, so it's basically right up against their shins and their shins are fairly vertical. And what can happen from this is, since the bar is so close to you, your shoulders are so far forward in front of the bar that you can have the tendency to want to pull your shoulders back to get your shoulders back further, but then that causes that hyperextension. You're raising your chest too much. Of course, having the bar closer to you is a good idea in terms of leverage, but if you do force it to where it's too close, especially given your individual leverages, it can cause problems. And I actually experienced this recently where I was sumo deadlifting with the bar as close as possible, and it was causing me to hyperextend my back slightly. So what I'm going to do is just have the bar just a little bit more forward next time. My second tip is to focus on depressing your shoulders down rather than retracting your shoulders back when deadlifting. And this is a common problem some people have because they're worried about having their back round, obviously, during the deadlift. And I don't recommend that you even allow your upper back to round for most trainees, although advanced powerlifters can do this safely. But generally, I don't recommend it. And then some people take it to the other extreme, so they think they need to retract their shoulders to keep their upper back tight. But the truth is, if you just depress your shoulders down, that will enable you to activate your lats and keep proper posture throughout the lift. My third tip is to focus on tucking your chin down. And this sounds like a contradiction to what I've said before, you may be thinking, because it is. I've said before that you should have your chin slightly up, essentially looking slightly up relative to your back angle to increase upper back tightness. However, the problem is, if the person's having an issue with hyperextension, then you need a different cue than someone else. And this gets to something Brett Contreras has posted on his Facebook page where he talked about this, where different people need different mental cues. So for most people, hyperextension is not a problem, so they can look slightly up, and I do recommend that. But if hyperextension is your problem, then you should look down slightly because this will just help you keep that proper position, keep that neutral spine. Okay, now for the back squat, what I recommend for the high bar back squat is to focus on keeping your hips underneath your shoulders so you stand as erect as possible. However, what I also want to mention is that in the low bar back squat, you won't necessarily have this happen, because for most people in the low bar back squat, what you want to do is have a slight degree of forward lean. Because if you don't have this degree of forward lean, what will usually happen is you'll have elbow pain, because the bar is essentially obviously lower on your back, and it'll essentially all go to your elbows if you are keeping your elbows down and you're standing completely straight. And also, since the bar's lower on your back, you can lean a little bit more forward with the bar still over your heels to mid-foot area. I want to give a shout out to Bryce Lewis over at The Strength Athlete. If you like my channel, I guarantee you'll like his content. And he has a great video on bracing your core for the squat. And the reason why I think you should really take a look at it is because sometimes we understand these concepts and you just understand what we're talking about. You get the cues. But until you see someone actually do it with some heavy weights in their workout, it really doesn't sink in quite as well. So definitely check that video out. I'll put a link to it in the description. Another point I want to bring up for the squat is to focus on breathing deeply before you even begin the lift. And the reason why I didn't bring this up for the deadlift, even though it is important to breathe deeply for the deadlift as well, is because for the squat, I feel like this is a bit more prominent. And I think that this is due to the fact that you have a heavy load on your back before you even begin the movement. So what happens is you usually naturally end up breathing shallower and breathing into your chest just as a reaction to that. but you have to be comfortable with the weight on your back, then breathe deeply. Because if you breathe into your chest too much, as people say, then what happens is you puff your chest up and out. And of course that leads to that spinal hyperextension before the lift is initiated. Lastly, when it comes to the bench press, hyperextension is actually not a problem, and it really is encouraged. The reason being is because you want to retract your shoulders back and bring your chest up, because this will put your shoulders in a safer position. So if you do bench press with your heels planted on the floor and your hips planted on the bench throughout the entire lift, then you will not have an issue in terms of having a natural arch, as that is just not a problem, because you're not loading your spine the way you are in the squat and deadlift. So the hyperextension, the effect of the hyperextension just is not the same. Alright, that's it guys. I hope this video was helpful. Make sure to like the video, support the channel, subscribe if you haven't already, and thanks for watching guys. Peace!
And just hold it in a squat walkout for something like 30 seconds. There's really no way to do it comfortable unless you're bracing properly. Tension in the glutes,